Hello and welcome back. Today I got something special for you. An entire recap of the story of the original Aion game. I just want to start this with saying, while this is an entire recap, it is not a complete retelling of all the details. A lot of topics that I could talk about for like half an hour are summarized into a 20-second section. This video's purpose isn't to give you all the answers. 2 hours are by far not enough to get into all the details of the very vast Aion lore. This video's purpose is to refresh the memories of old players, to show the key events that happened in this world to new people that want to dive into Aion too, and ultimately to hopefully entice people to learn more about the vast lore of Aion. I have put a lot of work into this video, so hopefully you enjoy it. Let's go! Everything begins with the world we call home, Atreia. Unlike ordinary planets, Atreia is a hollow sphere, its two halves joined by a single radiant spire, known as the Tower of Eternity, the physical manifestation of the god Aion. Within this vast inner world, Aion gave life to countless beings, the mighty Drakon, the fragile yet gifted humans, and many other creations that filled Atreia with light and purpose. He created the powerful Drakon with the intent of them taking on a protective role on the planet. Humans flourished in this beautiful environment. They served and prayed to Aion, and in return they were provided with everything they needed through the nurturing glow of the tower. This time period was known as the Age of Dawn, and this did go on peacefully for thousands of years. Until the Drakon grew tired of their role as simple protectors for races that were inferior to them in almost all ways. Over many years, the Drakon's thirst for power grew only stronger and stronger. Entire species were eradicated by the Drakon, while some other races were enslaved and used against the humans. The humans stood as the only species on Atreia who fought valiantly against the Drakon. The Drakon grew increasingly more violent and prideful. They demanded godlike powers from Aion for their continuous loyalty. Aion refused, as he knew he would have to oppose his own creation. Without Aion's consent, they decided to obtain power through their own means. The results were slow, until one Drakon in particular found a source of power outside of Aion's reach. This Drakon was Phrygian, the first Drakon to ascend into an empowered version of himself. With this, he became the ultimate ruler of his race. They turned their backs on their creator and took on a new name, Balaur. Phrygian's method of obtaining power was spread, but while the Balaur all awakened, the vast majority did not achieve conditions similar to his. However, there were a few exceptions, and Phrygian granted these Balaur titles similar to his, the Dragon Lords. After 4 of them emerged, he declared that his formation was perfect, and that there would be no other additions to the Dragon Lords. United under one banner, led by the 5 Dragon Lords, the Balaur were an organized force that was a huge threat to not only the humans, but also to the Tower of Eternity itself. The humans gathered their numbers and tried to defend not only themselves, but also Aion. Even though at this time the humans already suffered greatly under the violence of the Balaur, their faith in Aion was unbroken. The humans did their best, but sadly they offered little challenge for the overwhelmingly physically and mentally superior Balaur. The Balaur massacred thousands upon thousands of humans. All humans gathered at the base of the tower, as this was the last place they could run to, and the one place they had to protect. Aion worried about the safety of the humans, and finally took action. He created an etheric field around the tower. Think of it as a protective shield which the Balaur could not break through. He also created the 12 Imperial Lords to assist the humans in defending themselves and the Tower of Eternity. It was their task to restore order in Atreia. With them, the humans finally had a chance to fight back. The Empyrean Lords fought bravely against the Balor, but that alone wasn't enough. Aion gifted the world with a powerful substance called ether, but only very few humans possessed the power to control ether, and even less actually achieved ascension. Massive wings would erupt from the backs of these humans, gifting them the power of flight. These ascended humans would then be called Devas. Under the watchful eyes of the Empyrean Lords, the number of Devas multiplied many times. The Empyrean Lords led these Devas into battles against the Balor, but even with this empowered battle force for the humans, the Balor proved to be formidable opponents. What started as a few isolated battles soon turned to full-scale war. This was the start of the Millenium War. Two of the Empyrean Lords, Lord Azphel and Lady Seal, became the guardians of the Tower of Eternity, while the other Empyrean Lords focused on recruiting more and more Devas for their fight against the Balor. The Balor tried to destroy the etheric field Aion had created around the tower, but the etheric field withstood even the strongest attacks of the Dragon Lords. However, the etheric field had only a limited range, and everything that was outside of Aion's protection has been ravaged and destroyed by the Balor. The war raged on the outskirts of the field, where Devas and the Empyrean Lords fought bravely against the Balor. But despite the bravery and ferocity on both sides, each soon realized the futility of the situation. The Balor could not get past the etheric field to destroy the Tower of Eternity, and the Empyrean Lords and their Devas could not venture outside of the etheric field long enough to secure a decisive victory. After many years, it became clear that this was a stalemate that couldn't be overcome by either side. Thousands of Devas lost their lives while defending the etheric field against the Balor. But this loss was not one-sided, as the Balor also lost countless numbers on their side to the Devas and the Empyrean Lords. Due to this difficult situation, where more and more people on both sides are dying without any progress, the Empyrean Lord Azphel decided to propose a peace treaty with the Balor to his fellow Empyrean Lords. Although it was a noble idea by Azphel, the proposal divided the Empyrean Lords for the first time since the beginning of the Millenium War. Heated debates and arguments followed. Some of the lords, like Lady Ariel, desired peace, but some other Empyrean Lords, like Lord Azphel, vehemently disagreed. With 5 of the lords being for the peace treaty and 5 of them being against it, it left only the 2 Tower Guardians, Azphel and Seal, to decide what they would do. Azphel managed to convince Seal, and therefore the preparations for the peace treaty started. The Balor Lords agreed to talk with them, and soon enough they would appear before the etheric field. While uncertainty still plagued the Empyrean Lords, the Balor made the first gesture of good faith by appearing with not their entire army, but instead with only a small troop of elite warriors. The Empyrean Lords lowered the etheric field to let the Balor Lords into the Tower of Eternity, where the peace talks would take place. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Tower of Eternity stood there without the protection of the etheric field. The talks started peacefully. Lady Seal tried to mend hundreds of years of hatred, but out of nowhere chaos broke out. Nobody knows what exactly happened, but the Balor Lord Beritra had been attacked and injured. This led to multiple fights inside and outside of the tower. Lady Seal and Lord Azphel rushed to reactivate the etheric field. In this chaos, Thrajin shot a huge fireball at the unprotected Tower of Eternity and broke it into 2. This was the Cataclysm. As the tower broke into 2, the Balor Lords fled and the world watched as everything seemed to end. Lord Azphel and his followers rushed to the north, while Lady Ariel and her followers went south, both hoping to play their role in saving the planet. But in the end, it required the sacrifice of Lady Seal and Lord Azphel to stabilize the etheric field and to basically halt the Cataclysm. This saved the world from complete destruction, but the wounds are deep. The peace talks failed, 2 of the Empyrean Lords are dead, and the planet has been torn apart. The Empyrean Lords were now divided into 2 groups. The Seraphim Lords, led by Lady Ariel in Elysia, and the Shadim Lords, led by Lord Azphel in Asmodee. The Seraphim Lords blamed the Shadim Lords in their unwillingness to engage in peace for the tragedy that led to the Cataclysm, while the Shadim Lords blamed the Seraphim Lords' weakness and their blind trust for the destruction of the Tower of Eternity. This situation between them was very tense, but their focus for now was to get back on their feet. The Seraphim Lords consisted of the following lords: Lady Ariel, the Lady of Light, Lord Weisel, the Lord of Freedom, Lord Kaizinal, the Lord of Illusion, Lord Nezikan, the Lord of Justice, and Lady Eustiel, the Lady of Life. They chose to call themselves the Ilios of Elysia. The land of Elysia was sun-soaked and peaceful. Even though many parts of Elysia were left in ruins due to the Cataclysm, the people in Elysia did not give up and tried to rebuild their lives in this new world. The previous capital, Sela, had also been destroyed during the Cataclysm. While the Ilios wanted to rebuild a part of it, they kept getting attacked by bestial races, which resulted in very slow progress. The Seraphim Lords therefore decided to gather their magic and lift this part of land into the air and out of the enemy's reach. This place came to be known as Sanctum, the new capital city of Elysia. Sanctum was initially only for the Empyrean Lords and their Devas. No humans were allowed to enter, and, well, they couldn't really do that anyway since it was in the air. Even much later, when the first airships were built and humans could reach Sanctum, humans are now only allowed in the lower parts of Sanctum. But let's now look at the other side, which wasn't as lucky with their half of the planet. The Shadim Lords on this half consisted of the following lords: Lord Azphel, the Lord of Shadow, Lord Sekel, the Lord of Destruction, Lady Lumiel, the Lady of Wisdom, Lord Marketon, the Lord of Fate, and Lady Triniel, the Lady of Death. The Shadim Lords chose to call themselves the Asmodeans of Asmodee. The lands of Asmodee were plunged into darkness after the Cataclysm. The Shadim Lords realized that if their civilization was to survive, it would have to grow into something powerful and strong as quickly as possible to survive the desolate wasteland of Asmodee. The harsh conditions of this world made their bodies adapt. Over time, their hands and feet became claws, and manes grew along their backs. Furthermore, when they became angry, their eyes started glowing red. While the Ilios on the other side of the planet had the remnants of the old capital Sela they could rebuild, the Asmodeans had nothing that could replace Sela. Humans and Devas lived scattered and endangered by the bestial races around them. Survival was the only thing on the mind of most Asmodeans. Lord Azphel saw the struggle of the humans and Devas. He feared that this harsh world would make the Asmodeans change even more, until they become mere animals. There was no other choice. He decided that the new capital had to be built before all hope is lost. After a lot of trouble and hard work, the new capital of Asmodee had been constructed, Pandemonium. Hundreds of years passed, both factions had no contact with each other, and their differences grew further and further. This is very well shown in the Aion comic To Atreya. I will link the Korean version in the description, but we also have a translation for it in our Discord server. Almost 250 years after the Cataclysm, earthquakes wrecked the land around Verteron in Elysia. A piece of Verteron itself was heaved into the sky, and from inside the cracks in that rock, a blue light radianced forth. A courageous Deva entered the blue light, only to return minutes later and report it was a doorway to another space. Seraphim Lord Nezikan created a fortress in Verteron for the first large fissure, which was hovering above the village. Examining the fissures, Lord Nezikan deployed his brigade general, Deltras of the Storm Legion, to bravely walk through this so-called rift with his legion and investigate this new realm. Tremors in the earth and lights in the sky were reported from all corners of Asmodee. Shadim Lord Marketon, fearing they might be omens of something terrible, sequestered himself away and intensely studied these portents. On the streets of Pandemonium, in the villages and farms, one rumor was in everyone's thoughts. The Belaur were returning. When Lord Marketon emerged from his tower, he said the portents were clear. A doorway would be opening in the desert of Morheim. A doorway to another place, and something would be coming through. Fearing it would be the Belaur, Lord Azphel ordered Lord Seekel to lead a force to Morheim immediately, to force the invaders back from Asmodee. Following Marketon's prophecies, they set their camp in the desert and waited. The Storm Legion came across a huge Belaur legion in this unknown land that is soon to be called the Abyss. The Storm Legion was victorious, however victory came with a high cost. Bloodied and spent, the Storm Legion was reduced to a mere fraction of their full capacities. Deltras and his Storm Legion came across another portal in the Abyss. They sought the promise of rest, and assuming it would lead them back to Elysia, they ventured through it with hope. When they emerged on the other side, they were shocked to find themselves in a cold and barren desert, unlike any place they had ever been. Deltras and his legion met the native race of this land. They were similar to the Ilios, but darker and much more aggressive looking. Tall and clawed creatures with manes of fur down their backs. And here is where the story splits into two different versions. One told by the Ilios and one told by the Asmodeans. I already made a video about it where I go much more in detail with it. If you're interested, I will link it in the description. But without talking about how it happened, let me tell you the outcome of this first meeting between the Ilios and the Asmodeans. Deltras, the brigade general of the Storm Legion, had been killed. The massive Storm Legion had been reduced to only 10 men. These 10 people escaped back through the rift to the Abyss. And only 2 of these 10 found their way back to Elysia. The 2 of them, Triton and Akarios, came to Sanctum as swiftly as they could on their bloodied wings. Bowing before Lady Ariel, they made their report that the other Imperial Lords had survived, and their followers now walked a path of darkness. The Seraphim Lords were furious, and they took action. They declared war on Asmodee. Not long after, the Shadim Lords received a report by a local Deva that the Ilios were coming back from unexpected rifts to Asmodee. The Shadim Lords retaliated to the mockery and trespassing of the land. Legions of Asmodeans in the Abyss were ordered to take the war to the Ilios rather than the war to them. So the Asmodeans ventured through the rifts in Asmodee and arrived in the Abyss. There they built a fortress called the Premium Fortress and hunted for the Ilios. However, instead of the Ilios, they found their ancient enemies, the Belaur. After a gruesome battle against the Belaur, the Asmodeans had not much time to rest, because the Ilios appeared and started their attack once more. The Asmodeans desperately tried to defend their fortress against the Ilios, but under their leader, Lord Kaizinal, the Ilios were too strong. Just as everyone thought the battle was decided, Lady Lumiel appeared to help the Asmodeans. Lady Lumiel activated a gigantic force field that pushed the Ilios away and into the depths of the Abyss. Lord Kaizinal no longer having the upper hand in this battle, he ordered the Ilios to retreat. This was only the first battle of many to come in the Abyss. This was the start of the Abyss War. The Deltras story, which was a big push for the Abyss War, was also made into a comic, and I gotta say it looks very nice. The story is called The Tragedy of Deltras, and is told by Pernos, or Akarios. I will link it in the description. Only a few years after the Deltras Incident was another conflict between the two races, the Battle of Gold Island. This battle was the true beginning of the Abyss War, although regular people remember the Deltras Incident as the start of the Abyss War, since there is not much publicly known about the Battle of Gold Island. In the early days of the Abyss War, there were countless fights between the Seraphim Lords and the Shaddim Lords. In the game you can even see the giant weapons of Sekel and Nezakan, Nezakan's sword and shield, and Sekel's spear and arrows. All three factions fought each other in the Abyss, conquering fortresses and trying to take control of the entire Abyss. For over 500 years this war continued, with neither a winner nor an end in sight. At this point the game starts and the player begins their journey. The player himself has a crucial role in the story of Aion, so while I will not go over every single detail, I will give a broad overview of the player's journey. The player himself is only a human mercenary that has lost his memories at first, but soon he learns, thanks to an old hermit named Pernos, that he was a Deva before he had lost his memories. This was a great mystery, as a Deva regressing back to being a human was absolutely unheard of. With the help of Pernos, he once again ascended as a Deva, and started to help with the problems in all the lands of Elysia, whilst he tried to piece together the mystery of his own forgotten past. Now I will mostly focus on the Ilios side for this. There are multiple reasons for it, but the most important reason is that it will be easier to understand the Ilios side, and I want to prevent too much jumping back and forth between the factions. Also, both factions' different stories do ultimately lead to the same destination. The Ilios see themselves as blessed survivors of the Cataclysm, but they do harbor deep resentment towards both Balar and Asmodeans. The Ilios do try to rebuild their society, but new threats emerge. The aftermath of the Cataclysm brings great trouble upon them. Some creatures in the regions of Elysia start behaving differently. They become aggressive. The great forest in Eltnan is withering. A sickness is spreading through Hyron, and supporters of the Balar start rising inside of the etheric field. Let's start there, with the supporters of the Balar, the Kral. The Kral have been loyal servants of the Balar for a long time. The Balar could not overcome the strength of the etheric field, which they needed to do to overtake the entirety of Elysia. So instead of a frontal attack that they already tried multiple times, the Balar decided to use their loyal servants inside the etheric field, the Kral. The Kral are creating abyss gates with which the Balar could bypass the strong etheric field and enter Elysia to destroy the etheric field from the inside. They tried to create multiple abyss gates, one in Poeta, in Verteron, and in Eltnan. All of those were stopped and destroyed with the help of the player, shortly before the Balar could venture through these abyss gates. But the abyss gate in Hyron could not be stopped. The Kral managed to open an abyss gate there, and with that, the Balar could finally invade the lands of Elysia. The Ilios recognized the immediate threat and sent out their Devas to push them back, and to ultimately destroy the abyss gate. This invasion of the Balar, together with the constant fights in the Abyss against both the Asmodeans and the Balar, was the biggest threat. But it was far from the only danger Elysia had to work with. As I mentioned before, the lands of Elysia suffered. Forests withered, sicknesses are spreading, and creatures started to get more aggressive. It was as if the land of Elysia itself was poisoned, as if the land itself was slowly dying. This was a crucial problem, yet there were many problems that required the attention of the Devas. A new rebel group started to appear more and more often. They called themselves the Lephorist Revolutionaries. They at first only spread misinformation and corrupted other people into joining their cause, but they soon escalated their actions. They caused more and more chaos inside the etheric field. They tried to destroy the observatories that protect the etheric field. They stole artifacts and even destroyed and poisoned the brooks of Lady Eusteal. They started experimenting on creatures, humans, anything they could get their hands on. And all of it was because they followed the self-proclaimed 13th Empyrean Lord called Lefar. This constant sabotage and manipulation of the people in Elysia was a huge problem for the Devas and their Seraphim Lords, who wanted to focus their efforts on the war against the Balaur and the Asmodeans. They couldn't spare the manpower to also deal with some rebels inside of the etheric field, while the greater threat of the Asmodeans and the Balaur tried to overpower them in the Abyss. There was, however, another group that opposed the Letharist revolutionaries. They were called the Shadow Elders. The Shadow Elders were a very mysterious and secretive group that actively fought against the doings of the Letharists. And this secretive group had quite a few high-ranking members on both sides, Ilios and Asmodeans. Sounds good for the Seraphim Lords, right? Not exactly. Because the Shadow Elders do not approve of the war between the Ilios and the Asmodeans. Their main goal is to end the war between the two races and to reunite them. They think there is corruption among the Empyrean Lords. They think the Empyrean Lords have neglected their roles as protectors and lost themselves in the endless war in the pursuit of revenge. All of these problems exist, so why do the Empyrean Lords and their Devas persist to destroy the other faction? Out of sheer revenge? Because of the Deltras Incident? Because of the failed peace negotiations? Well, all of that is a part of why they can't really approach each other anymore. And adding to that is another problem that is slowly destroying the world. The destroyed Tower of Eternity. When it broke apart, it left two stumps of the tower on each side of the planet. The Tower of Light in Elysia and the Tower of Darkness in Asmodee. The rift between these two broken tower fragments allowed the ether to flow away freely. This also led to the creation of the Abyss. Due to this, a great amount of ether was simply lost, and scholars agreed that sooner or later, this would lead to the destruction of the entire world. The only way the continuous loss of ether could be prevented is by destroying one of the two halves of the tower. However, whoever loses their tower could also lose the protection of their etheric field. And that means the Balaur would totally overrun that faction. This is another reason why there is no turning back, why there is no time to falter in the eyes of the Empyrean Lords. A research division of the Ilios troops found a temporal rift. This anomaly showed a possible future in which the Balaur invade Elysia. Sanctum falls and the world itself begins to burn and rot. This became known as Dark Poeta. Dark Poeta, however, wasn't a mere illusion. It's a real alternate timeline that was generated by a temporal distortion in the ether flow. When the Tower of Eternity shattered, fragments of etheric energy scattered through time and space, creating what scholars call temporal scars. Dark Poeta is one such scar. The etheric veil separates these timelines and realities, and it is maintained by the etheric field of Atreya and the tower fragments. When it is stable, it prevents this time bleed, meaning beings from other timelines can't cross over. However, that veil is not invincible. There are several things that weaken the veil. One major reason is the Abyss War itself. It drains ether, and if the ether density drops too low, time fractures like Dark Poeta become more active. In this Dark Poeta, the invading army is led by Brigade General Anuhard, a high-ranking Balaur commander who serves directly under the Dragon Lord Tiamat. Anuhard uses experiments to shift the ether in Poeta to Drana, which poisons the land. Drana is a corrupted version of ether. When the Balaur were first created by Aion, they were infused with ether, just like the Empyrean Lords and the Devas. Over time, however, their greed and hunger for more twisted them. Their bodies mutated ether into Drana, a substance that now sustains them. In a way, Drana is the consequence of desire without restraint, the corruption of something pure. While ether is creative and harmonious, and is used by the Empyrean Lords and the Devas, Drana is destructive and parasitic, and is used by the Dragon Lords and the Balaur. The Balaur's usage of Drana is vast. It reaches from using it as an energy resource for their creations, to different weapons, and all the way to using it as a resource to sustain themselves, like breathing or food. Some Ilios and Asmodean researchers study Drana to understand the Balaur power and technology, and to also use it as an energy source for themselves. This, however, is highly controversial, because while it has potential for great power, both Lord Kaisenel and Lord Marketing warn that experimenting with Drana risks falling into the Balaur's path. A prolonged exposure to Drana corrupts mortal creatures and causes them to mutate. In Devas, it can cause Drana sickness or Drana madness. Anuhard has two goals with this. First, he wants to reshape Poeta into a Drana-rich region, which would only empower the Balaur and their experiments further. And the second goal is to use the experiments for a Drana distortion. This would weaken the etheric veil, and basically would make it possible for the Balaur to invade the real Poeta. The Ilios do venture through this temporal rift, but not really to win the war there. They enter it to understand more about all of it. Essentially, they enter Dark Poeta to study the Balaur's corruption of the land, to observe how Brigade General Anuhard manipulates ether and Drana, and lastly to also find a way to prevent this timeline from becoming reality. The Devas learn a lot from this temporal rift. It is the first sign that both ether and Drana must remain in balance, and while this rift vanishes soon after, the horrific memory of what might lie ahead lingers. Still being a mere foot soldier in this giant world full of troubles, the player slowly regained at least some of the memories of his past life during his journey. He seems to have been the leader of an elite legion, called the Mirage Legion, and some even called him the 13th Empyrean Lord. But what does that even mean? With more questions than answers, he continues his journey, which now leads him to a new region, Balorea. The etheric storms that sealed off Balorea had weakened over the years. Balorea was the place that the Balaur still ruled, completely untouched by the Ilios and the Asmodeans. But this was going to change now. Both factions saw the weakening of the etheric storms as a divine sign, a chance to for the first time strike directly at the Balaur. Scouts confirmed that the Balaur used the Balorea region as their strongholds to regroup and strengthen their powers. Therefore, the Seraphim Lords decided that simply defending Elysia wasn't enough anymore. They had to take the fight directly to the Balaur. This decision was only enforced by the fact that the rifts between Elysia and Asmodee had become more unstable, and therefore too dangerous for bigger attacks, which would have been needed to reach their goal of defeating the other faction. The re-emergence of Balorea offered the chance of a more decisive strike against the Balaur, along with the chance of reclaiming some of the ancient landmass. The Ilios were led by the Seraphim Lord Kaisenel and claimed the Ingison region, while the Asmodeans were led by the Shiddim Lord Marketing, who claimed the Gelkmaros region. The Balaur Lord Tiamat, who ruled over these lands from her fortress in Tiamaranta, forced her troops to mine and cultivate Drana in these regions, something the Devas were already scarcely familiar with after the Dark Poeta incident. The goal of the Devas here in Balorea was to reclaim this ancient land, and now to also kill the Dragon Lord Tiamat. However, for that plan to work, they first had to establish their foothold in Ingison, destroy the Drana farms of the Balaur, and slowly push the Balaur back to the entrance of the Silentera Canyon. The player assisted the Seraphim Lord Kaisenel and his agents with all of that in Ingison, slowly gaining their trust and the reputation of being a reliable asset to the Ilios. Beyond the Balau and many new wild creatures, there were two particular groups in Ingison that played a big role. First, the Dragonbound. When the Cataclysm shattered Atreia, many humans were left behind in the Abyss, exposed to cruel etheric storms, Balau raids, and more. Some of these survivors turned to the only beings that still seemed eternal, the Dragon Lords. Over generations, their need for the Balau stability turned into fanatical worship. But the Dragonbound not only worship the Balau, they seek to become like them. In a ritual called the Binding, they're infused with Drana or even dragon blood. This causes their bodies and minds to mutate and also makes their loyalty unshakable. They are specifically serving Tiamat and are used for anything she needs. They even kidnap Devas to experiment on them, trying to recreate true ascension through Drana. The second group that is very important here in Balau is the Rayan tribe. Before the Cataclysm, there was a legion called Seal Spear Legion. They were a group of elite warriors that were often the front line during their earliest wars against the Balau. Not only did they defend the Tower of Eternity against the Balau, they also conducted expeditions into Balau back then. During the Cataclysm, Seal Spear Legion was stationed deep in Balau. When the Tower of Eternity collapsed and the world was torn apart, Seal Spear Legion was completely cut off from the rest of the world. When Lady Seal sacrificed herself to save the planet, her sacrifice also reached her soldiers from the Seal Spear Legion. It burned away one of their wings. Now stranded in this Balau-infested land, without any safe haven, without any ether to draw their strength upon, wounded and desperate, they were hunted by the Balau. But even with one wing burned off, with no help from Aion's ether, the Seal Spear Legion struggled and fought against the Balau. They showed why they were the chosen warriors under Lady Seal Spear Legion. This, however, didn't last. Over time, the big amount of Balau was simply too much to fight against. That's why they changed their focus from warfare to survival. Over the next few hundred years, these survivors took on a new culture and became known as the Rayans. Over generations without ether, they lost their Deva capabilities, and that included their immortality. Rayans became mortal again. They aged and died. They did live longer than regular humans. While humans lived for multiple decades, Rayans lived for centuries. But again, they were not immortal anymore. With this came also a shift in their philosophical views. Instead of worshipping Aion or the Empyrean Lords, they now revered ether itself as the living breath of the world. They came to believe in the balance of everything: light and dark, creation and destruction, ether and Drana. Where the Ilios sought purity and the Asmodeans sought strength, the Rayans sought balance. These Rayans were led by a man named Karun. He is seen as both king and sage by the Rayans, a living symbol of the philosophies about balance. At first, the Rayan only acted as guides for both Ilios and Asmodeans, in this land both factions had no experience with. Tiamat soon realized that the ether-born immortality of the Devas gave them an advantage that the Balau didn't possess. She therefore began biomagical experiments to create her own ascended beings. These experiments created, for example, the Dramatas. This is Padmarashka, an incomplete dragon, a failed experiment that nonetheless serves Tiamat. Padmarashka's support for Tiamat was simple. It would breed massive amounts of Balau over and over again. That was her purpose. Even as the Devas pushed the Balau further back and Tiamat ordered Padmarashka to retreat, Padmarashka refused to leave. Her motherly instinct would not allow her to leave her axe behind. As the balance begins to collapse due to Tiamat's actions, Karun held a council with the Rayan elders. Most Rayan elders wanted to remain neutral and not intervene, but Karun's decision has already been made. If we remain still, Balau dies with us. Balance is not silence, it is motion towards harmony. With this, the Rayans started to cooperate with both the Ilios and the Asmodeans to help them actively fight against the Balar. While the Devas kept pushing back the Balar, they discovered the Jotun race. These Jotun were long ago created by Aion himself as the answer to the Balar threat. Their technology highly exceeds the inventions of any other race. The Jotun created the petroglyphs, which were great stone giants intended as weapons against the Balar. In a ferocious battle they however lost against the Balar, and now hundreds of years later only a few of them survived, and now they live in these underground workshops. The Devas heard from the Rayans that Tiamat ruled over most regions of Balorea from her homeland, Tiamaranta. However, they could not simply follow her, because a barrier blocked her path. And this barrier could only be overcome by destroying the etheric field generator inside of the Bashmandir Temple. The Bashmandir Temple was an ancient temple that had been overtaken by Tiamat's legions, and it was now used as a prison for special inmates that opposed Tiamat. The most noteworthy prisoner was Stormwing. Stormwing was a dragon that opposed Tiamat, and although he was very strong, he was defeated by her. She then imprisoned him in a fragmented dimension deep in the temple, with a ritual so strong that it had to be renewed regularly by powerful Balar mages. When the Devas fought their way through the Bashmandir Temple and managed to weaken this barrier, they could finally prepare for their journey into Tiamaranta. However, as they approached the weakened barrier and attacked it to destroy it completely, Tiamat herself appeared. The Ilios troops and Kaiser's agent Vale attacked Tiamat, but what they didn't know was that Tiamat was not only strong herself, but she had also an unknown weapon or artifact with her. With this, she became even stronger, and easily gained the upper hand in this battle against the Ilios. As she dominated this fight, a new airship appeared. It was Karun with the Rayan tribe. He ordered the Rayan to save the surviving members of the Ilios and bring them on board. With a few distraction bombs towards Tiamat, they could save the surviving Ilios. However, Tiamat prepared to charge towards the airship. Before she could take flight, Kaiser's agent Vale stopped Tiamat from chasing them, sacrificing herself to ensure that the Rayan airship could flee and that the Ilios on board would survive. This was not only a big defeat for the Ilios, but it was also a reality check. Tiamat, the weakest among the Dragon Lords, could single-handedly crush them like this? What power might the other Dragon Lords hold? Karun brought the Ilios to Sarpen, the homeland of the Rayans. The Ilios were thankful, however a surprise awaited them. Karun and the Rayan did not only save the Ilios, they also saved the Asmodeans and brought both factions to Sarpen. After hundreds of years of war, the tension between Ilios and Asmodeans was understandable. Karun, however, gathered both races and gave his command. There will be no war under this sky. The Rayans will protect this land. Fight here and you fight against me. Any Ilios or Asmodean who ignored this law would face Karun's wrath. He became a divine mediator, preventing Balorea from collapsing under another ether imbalance. So for the first time in hundreds of years, the Ilios and Asmodeans would not fight against each other. This did, however, not mean that they were at friendly terms at all. It just meant that they can't deny the overwhelming power and presence Karun had. Nobody knew what Karun was, not at the level of an Imperial Lord, but above anything else known in the Ilios ranks. The Devas learn much more about the Rayan and their culture in Sarpen. The Rayans still worship Lady Seal, or maybe less worship her, but more respect and honor the ideas she stands for. sacrifice, balance, and preservation. Whilst recovering from the defeat in Ingesen, the player helps out the Rayan in Sarpen, until he is approached by a Leferist. This Leferist says that Lefar himself wants to talk to the player, and that is the moment when Lefar introduces himself as the Empyrean Lord Azphel, the Lord of Space. He was believed to have died during the Cataclysm together with Lady Seal, yet here he is and says, "Yes, it's true, I, Azphel, am hidden beneath the guise of Lefar, just as something greater is hidden inside you." But there is no time for questions now, Deva. Azphel is the one who finally tells the Devas what the artifact was that overpowered them in the fight against Tiamat. Tiamat had claimed Seal's relics. Seal's relics are an ancient artifact, basically the vessel for the leftover power of Lady Seal. They amplify the power of whomever controls them, and they also can be used to mold or influence time itself. Tiamat's troops found these relics somewhere in Galkmaros, and now Tiamat herself holds them. There is, however, a glimmer of hope, because Tiamat has not achieved full control over these relics. To gain full control, she sends her legions to search for a Rayan woman named Oriata. It is said that Oriata has the power to neutralize Seal's relics, and with that, she would not only be a powerful weapon against Tiamat, but it also means that if she falls into the hands of Tiamat, Tiamat would achieve full control over Seal's relics. Karun sent Garnan, the daughter of the Rayan High Elder, to help the Ilios. But even though both the Ilios and Asmodeans learned of a trail that leads them to Oriata, they ignored the agreement to share information and to cooperate and acted on their own. This was just one of many occasions that both factions did act against their agreement to cooperate. That both factions did fall into the backs of the welcoming Rayan people. Oriata did not trust the Ilios and Asmodeans, so even though they found her, they did not receive her blessing. Despite the continuous betrayal of both factions, the Rayan continued to help them. With the help of the Rayan, Oriata reluctantly agreed to bestow her power to neutralize Seal's relics to the player. Karun then pointed the Devas to the Aturam Sky Fortress, a floating Balar fortress that was powered by Drana and prevented access to the Tiamaranta region. The Rayans worked with both factions to infiltrate the fortress and to destroy it. After the fortress fell, the way to Tiamaranta itself was opened. To get into Tiamaranta's Eye, where Tiamat herself was, the Devas had to first kill the incarnations of Tiamat that protected the four fortresses in Tiamaranta. As the way into Tiamaranta's Eye was finally opened, the first mission was not an all-out assault, but a scouting mission. For this, the Ilios, the Asmodeans and the Rayan gathered their own elite troops to infiltrate the Eye region. The Ilios and Asmodeans arrived first, eagerly charging in without waiting for the Rayans. Both factions noticed that Karun's will, which did forbid fighting between the races, has dispersed. Karun's influence didn't reach this place. Even though they were in the very heart of Tiamaranta, the hatred between the two races was so big that immediately after recognizing that Karun's will had no effect here, a fight between the Ilios and Asmodeans broke out. Garnan arrived with the Rayan troops and saw how the Ilios had dispersed of the Asmodean troops. She was shocked that even now, so close to the fight against the Dragon Lord Tiamat, they would keep up their fight between each other and spit on their alliance? Without the combined forces of Ilios, Asmodeans and Rayan, the infiltration of Tiamat's Eye failed, and they had to retreat. Karun has obviously heard how the Ilios and Asmodeans broke their alliance, even at this important point in time, right before fighting against the powerful Dragon Lord Tiamat. So when the time came to finally attack Tiamat herself, he did not trust the Ilios and Asmodeans anymore, and wanted to attack her alone with the Rayan people. This was not okay for the Ilios and the Asmodeans, because if Karun would kill Tiamat, that would also mean that Seal's relics would fall into his hands. The Seraphim Lord Kaizenal, however, sends a message to Karun. The message of Kaizenal to Karun was, "You cannot fight the will of Aion. One of my devas bears the destiny to confront the Dragon Lord. Deny them and you defy Aion himself." This was not just Kaizenal's insistence, this was a cosmic command. Karun was reluctant, but he agreed as he understood several things about this. Even though Karun himself was powerful, Kaizenal was an Imperial Lord, a direct servant of Aion's will. To oppose that would risk cosmic imbalance or divine retribution. Furthermore, he needed the player. The player possessed not only Oriata's blessing to neutralize Seal's relics, but he also had Kaizenal's protection. So together with Karun, the player confronted Tiamat. However, Tiamat used Seal's relic to trap Karun in a different timeline and then attacked the player. Before the attack could land, a protective shield would appear alongside Kaizenal himself. With the combined power of Lord Kaizenal and the player's power to neutralize Seal's relics, Tiamat had been killed. The battle had been finally won. One of the powerful Dragon Lords had been killed. As Kaizenal wanted to claim Seal's relics, however, Azphel appeared and immobilized both Kaizenal and the player to claim Seal's relic for himself. Azphel then vanished with Seal's relics. Karun reappeared from his entrapment and soon realized that he was misled once more, this time directly by the Seraphim Lord Kaizenal. Kaizenal didn't send the player to help the Rayan to take down Tiamat. He sent them along to make sure that neither Karun, the Rayan, nor the Asmodeans would get in possession of Seal's relics. And even if Karun would have been able to defeat Tiamat, Kaizenal would have appeared in the last moment to steal away Seal's relics himself. Even as anger boiled in Karun once more, he swallowed his pride. Despite the continuous backstabbing of both Ilios and Asmodeans, Tiamat was dead. This was a victory for everyone. The goal was now to find Azphel, who escaped with Seal's relics. Both Ilios and Asmodeans weren't capable of tracking him down, but Garnon from the Rayans could. And once more, despite being betrayed by them over and over again, Garnon agreed to help them. The player is finally able to track Azphel down. Azphel explains that back when the Balar started to rebel against Aion, Aion created the 12 Imperial Lords to fight against them. But the 12 Imperial Lords weren't enough. Azphel felt mocked by the humans and Devas, saying 12 of the Imperial Lords are not capable of winning a fight against 5 Dragon Lords? Azphel felt ashamed and began to plan the extermination of the Balar. He knew how to absorb and wield the power of the Tower of Eternity, but he needed the Dragon Lords to get closer to the tower. So he proposed a peace treaty, and although it came to be, the plan wasn't successful, and Phrygian's power shattered the Tower of Eternity. As Lady Seal sacrificed herself to get the etheric field back up and basically halt the cataclysm, Azphel pretended to help her, but in reality, he simply left. His plan now is to combine Seal's power to control time and his own power to control space, to go back to a time long before the cataclysm, before everything went wrong, and then he would become the sole lord of this planet, and he would lead it into a peaceful future. The prospect of Azphel rewinding time and then ruling over all of Atreya was not a pleasant thought to the Deva, so he tried to stop him. But the player was no match for the overwhelming power of an Imperial Lord. Just as everything seemed lost, Lady Sea's voice rang from her relics. "Azphel, come to me. We are going back together. Everything happens according to Aion's will. With a bright flash of light, both Zeus relics and Azphel disappeared. Karun then confronted the player, angry that once again the Ilios and Asmodeans acted on their own. If they had worked together, they maybe could have prevented the vanishing of Zeus relics. He did hold back his anger and simply said, "Get out of my sight." Returning to Sanctum, the player is actually forced to sign a confidentiality agreement to never talk about what happened with Azphel. This was ordered by the Seraphim Lord Kaizenel himself, because if the common people would know that an Imperial Lord planned all these heinous acts, the humans and Devas would not only lose faith in the Imperial Lords, but even their faith in Aion himself would begin to sway. But it doesn't end there. Karun knows the truth of everything that happened, so Sanctum wants him to be quiet about all of this as well. And if he doesn't, there will be consequences for him and the Rayan. After enduring being betrayed over and over again by both factions, Karun got pushed even further, threatened into silence. He sighed, but he agreed, and before the player could leave, Karun gave his final words. Ilios and Asmodeans must not take a single step on Rayan land ever again. The Rayan gave it their best attempt to unite with the Ilios and Asmodeans, but their trust has been abused by both factions over and over again. So now Karun and the Rayan elders confer on the banishment of the Ilios and Asmodeans from Sarpen. Garnon, who helped the player immensely in their journey in Sarpen and Tir Maranta, did not see it that way. She thinks that there has to be another way, because if the three factions, Ilios, Asmodeans and Rayan, do not unite, the Balao will stay an incredible threat that would take over everything. With Garnon's advice, the player then sets out to help the Rayan people and to show Karun that it doesn't have to be this way. Karun finally acknowledges the player's apology, and he takes back the planned banishment of the Ilios and Asmodeans from Sarpen. However, this doesn't resolve the conflict between the three races. It just means that the banishment plan was gone. Sanctum itself didn't see it as a problem that the cooperation and alliance have been broken. It was just a matter of killing Tiamat. The rest doesn't matter. Strange ether waves begin to pulse from the west of below Rhea. Researchers in both Elysia and Asmodee detected signals that didn't match normal ether activity. They were unknown energy signatures, stronger than anything that had been recorded since the Cataclysm. The land from which this energy came from had been sealed away in a spatial distortion during the Cataclysm, and only the collapse of Tiamat's Drana fields gave access to it again. This landmass was Catalan. Tiamat had been killed, but why did the other Dragon Lords not intervene or help? The Dragon Lords are mostly independent from each other. Every Dragon Lord has his own legions and his own plans. As the Devas closed in on Tiamat, she did send a messenger to Phrygian to ask for help, but her call for help was silenced by another Dragon Lord, Beritra. Beritra caught and tortured the messenger of Tiamat. The reason why he did that will be explained later. Due to this messenger, he not only learned of Tiamat's desperate call for help, he also learned that she had an unpowered but intact Hyperion in her possession that she did hide away. To explain that, we have to go back into the past, before the Cataclysm. The Danoir were an ancient and highly advanced race that flourished in the southwest of Balorea, a region called Catalan. The civilization thrived upon studying and refining a resource called Ide, a mysterious energy that even predates ether itself. while most other races or creatures saw Ide as dangerous energy. The Danois learned to manipulate it safely and to use it for power generation, defensive technology, and even teleportation and dimensional experiments. When the Belau rebelled against Aion and rose to power, the Danois refused to submit to them. To protect themselves against the Belau and the Dragon Lords, the Danois created a huge amount of Hyperions. Hyperions are big autonomous war constructs that are infused with Ide. They even created the Idian Depths, where massive amounts of Ide energy accumulated and powered all their temples and basically everything else in Catalan. The Belau were led by Tiamat and even assisted by Beritra. While Tiamat and her troops fought the Danois, Beritra silently sneaked around to learn more about the Danois' knowledge of Ide. The Danois were pushed back, and when they realized that the war will be lost, they decided to overcharge the Hyperions, so their technology won't be studied by the Belau and used against other races. This detonated all the Ide reactors across Catalan, which resulted in annihilating almost all Danois and most of Tiamat's troops with these huge explosions. Tiamat was wounded by these explosions and retreated to her lair in Tiamaranta. Beritra, however, saw the Danois technology as an opportunity. And now that he knows that Tiamat had an intact Hyperion hidden away, he wants to claim it for himself and study it to use it for his own gain. Now, before we go into more of this, let's talk shortly about the classes that were released during the 4.0 patch. First, the Songweavers or Bards. The Songweavers were not necessarily new. They had always existed, with the idea that voice, emotion and music could tune ether flows and stabilize the Tower of Eternity. This art was sacred to Lady Seal, who was also revered as the Lord of Balance in this sense. When the Tower of Eternity collapsed, that art, just like Lady Seal, was lost. In the centuries after the Cataclysm, the Devas focused on survival and warfare. Music and resonance were seen as impractical luxuries. After Tiamat's fall and Beritra's experiments with Ide, many sensitive beings began to hear a discord reverberating through the world. What others perceived as random Ide interference, they experienced as a cry for harmony. This resonance reignited the etheric energy in those Devas. Therefore, the first modern Songweavers emerged, reawakened of their ancient path. The second class are Gunslingers, or Gunners. With the discovery of Ide energy and machinery based on Ide, both Ilios and Asmodeans began to experiment with new ways to use Ide safely. They reverse-engineered the Danois Ide devices to create their own weaponry. Rather than relying solely on Aion's blessing, they use inventions and technology to fight. This led to the first technologically advanced soldiers, the Gunslingers. And the third class are the Ethertechs. After the battles in Catalan, both factions recovered and analyzed Danois constructs and war machines. Using this technology, they created powered armor that could harness Ide energy. These were initially only used for excavation, but were later adapted to be used in combat. Only Devas with exceptional ether control could synchronize with these war machines, and those who could would become known as Ethertechs. As the player set out and arrived in Catalan, he immediately got involved in a fight between Ilios and Asmodeans. During this fight, the player was surprised by an attack and fell unconscious. As he woke back up, he learns that he was asleep for 3 months. The Rayan, who also joined this expedition to Catalan, were worried and uneasy because Karun, their leader, had vanished here in Catalan. A man named Trezu was also desperately searching for Karun and asked the player for help. It turns out that Karun knew a lot about Ide energy and was pursued by Beritra's troops. Karun himself tried to use an Aichel cube, which turned out to be too unstable and exploded. Karun was then taken hostage by Beritra's troops. The player follows the trail of Karun and comes across an Aichel cube as well. He is then attacked by Beritra's troops and also thrown into a prison cell. In this prison cell, the player meets a scholar named Kaza. Together they escape, and Kaza suggests that the player should help him as his apprentice. The player immediately agreed, and thinking about it, the player agreed to many questionable things since he woke up from his 3-month coma. Kaza had found an old Danois relic, and with the help of the player, he could activate it. But that old relic was just a test. Kaza found a real Hyperion, and teleported the player there, to the Infinity Shard. Kaza was nowhere to be seen though. Instead, Karun lay on the ground, unconscious. Frazu appeared, and as he approached Karun, another person appeared as well, an Asmodean woman. It came to a clash between the two, and they both recognized each other. They were the Imperial Lords Nezakan and Triniel, disguised as two normal Devas. And why would they search for Karun? Well, because Karun was their child, the child of two Imperial Lords. They agreed on a temporary ceasefire and teleported away with Karun. After they left, Kaza appeared, and thanks to the player's natural affinity for Aion cubes, the Hyperion awakened. This is when Kaza revealed his true identity, the Dragon Lord Beritra. He was now in possession of the Hyperion and used the player to activate it. Before Beritra can attack the player, he is saved by one of Kaiser's agents. This agent finally explains that the player's 3-month unconsciousness wasn't natural. It was her experimenting on the mind of the player, making him more suggestible and gullible. This was due to Seraphim Lord Kaiser's command, with the goal of luring out Beritra and finally killing him. Under Karun's will, the Ilias and Asmodeans temporarily joined forces once more to launch an attack on Beritra. They managed to destroy the Hyperion. Beritra, however, did absorb the Id core that was inside of the Hyperion. While the Devas celebrated their momentary victory, Beritra started experimenting with merging Id with Ether. This, however, failed and led to massive Id explosions, which basically vaporized whole Catalam and destabilized the etheric current around it. Due to this Ether imbalance, 2 new regions emerged, Levenshore and Kaldor. Beritra had survived the explosion in Catalam, and has used his newfound knowledge to create and improve his own versions of Hyperions. He believed that by merging Id and Ether into a single controllable energy source, it would allow him to open true dimensional gates, not just temporary rifts, but permanent conduits between the realms. And thanks to the research of Tiamat in the Linkgate Foundry, he learned how to create these portals for his great invasion of Atreya. His troops infiltrated Sanctum and Pandemonium, the 2 capital cities of Elysia and Asmodee. His objective was to steal divine ether from the capitals to complete his experiments, not destroy them entirely. Nonetheless, both capitals took heavy damage. The capital of the Rayan, Kamar in Sarpan, was also infiltrated and heavily damaged. The remaining Rayan abandoned the capital and fled from Sarpan. The Devas follow Beritra's trail to Signia and Anshar. There they learned that this land was once under Tiamat's control, and she tried to hide something. The hidden power here was no other than the Dragon Lord Ereshkigal. Long ago, the Dragon Lords Phrygian and Ereshkigal got into a fight. Phrygian won the fight and sealed Ereshkigal away in a different dimension. Tiamat was tasked with making sure that Ereshkigal couldn't escape. That's why she took so many precautions, like even sinking the entire continents of Signia and Anshar underwater. Beritra has found out about this and now wants to absorb Ereshkigal's power. The Devas launched a full-scale raid on the Draken Spire depths in an attempt to stop Beritra. As he is slowly absorbing the relic that holds Ereshkigal's power, the Devas confront him. Despite the incredible power of Beritra, the Devas manage to wear him down to a point where he has to flee. But before he flees, he attempts to speed up the controlled absorbing of Ereshkigal's power. This was a crucial mistake, as his body was unable to properly absorb her power, which led to him being in a temporary weakened state. The Seraphim Lord Kaisenel warns that the world's etheric veil is fracturing. More temporal distortions start to appear. Many devas start having strange and vivid dreams. They see the unbroken Tower of Eternity. They hear a call that they describe as Aion's voice. The Imperial Lords take it as a sign that something divine is stirring. During Baritra's doings in these regions, strange Balar could be seen. Initially it was assumed that they were just some rogue Balar, but in reality these Balar were the legion of the Dragon Lord Ereshkigal. Ereshkigal's troops gathered knowledge from Baritra's experiments to desperately find a way to free their Dragon Lord. While Baritra was focused on his experiments with dimensional overlap, he not only weakened the seal that trapped Ereshkigal, but Ereshkigal was also slowly absorbing the pulsing energy his eyed explosions caused. As her prison shattered, Tiamat's remaining Balar and Baritra's abandoned troops both felt her call. They were reborn or reforged as her Frost Legion. She took over both remaining Balar regiments and made them her own. Ereshkigal's power and presence spread like frost across the Abyss. She began to reshape the Abyss into her own image, a kingdom of frozen time. Her goal was not conquest for domination like Tiamat, or greed for knowledge like Baritra, but absolute stillness. A world without struggle, without sound, without life. After the experiment of Baritra, new regions have opened for the Devas. The regions right around the Tower of Light in Elysia and the Tower of Darkness in Asmodee. The regions named Illuma and Northvolt. While the Ilios established a base in Illuma, the Asmodeans arrived in Northvolt, a mirrored region infused with the same unstable ether. The player has been sent to Illuma, and right as he appeared there, a fragment of the Tower of Eternity in the midst of the base in Illuma resonated with the player's arrival. It caused him to have faint visions of something, and to ultimately fall unconscious, to which he later awakes in front of Veda. Veda will play a crucial role in this patch. She is an agent of the Imperial Lord Ariel herself. She even admits that she has been watching the player and his actions for quite a while now. She, however, doesn't give the reason as to why. What is important is that the fragment of the Tower of Eternity resonated with him. As the player approaches the fragment once more, the portal beside the fragment starts to activate and pulls him into the portal. This led the player into the Library of Knowledge, a secret library that holds the most extensive and accurate reports about the true history of Atreya. The library is tended to by Libo creatures, and guarded by strange and powerful otherworldly creatures. Here the player learned that he was the Archdeva, the 13th Imperial Lord, and that there is much more to the failed peace talks than what Israfel had told him. Israfel had a unique way with words. He managed to convince others easily, and that is very clearly shown in the time shortly before the peace talks. When 5 of the Imperial Lords were for the peace talks, and 5 of them were against it, he managed to convince Lady Seal to be for the peace talks with the Balar. After that, Israfel also managed to talk Baritra into convincing the Dragon Lords to agree to show up to the peace talks and help him with his plan. And finally, Israfel also talked to the Archdeva and convinced him to a surprise attack against the Balar at the peace talks. When the peace talks started, everything seemed to go smoothly, until the Archdeva gave the signal to attack. A fierce fight between the Imperial Lords and the Dragon Lords broke out. In this chaos, Israfel snuck away and hurried to the artifact he found inside the Tower of Eternity. His plan was not only to kill the Dragon Lords with this artifact, but also to kill his fellow Imperial Lords with it, and to ultimately rule alone over the entire world. As he started to activate the artifact, Phrygian appeared behind him. Phrygian had seen through Azphel's plan and followed him. He shot a huge fireball at the artifact, which then caused a huge explosion that ultimately led to the Cataclysm. The Archdeva had realized his mistake immediately, how he has been blinded by his own pride and convinced by Azphel to do this. The Archdeva gave up the entirety of his own life force in an attempt to restore the etheric field, hoping it would at the very least prevent the complete destruction of Atreya. Lady Seal appeared beside him, and she told the Archdeva, "You are the protector of Atreya, and the fate of Aion is in your hands. When the time that was stopped flows once again, when Atreya faces grave danger and is in need of your power, you will return to Atreya and protect the world once more, for that is your duty." With these words, she sealed the remainders of his power away inside the tower. And then Lady Seal sacrificed herself to freeze the time around the Tower of Eternity and the surrounding lands. This basically paused the Cataclysm. As the player moves further into the Library of Knowledge, he encounters incarnations of different avatars. After fighting them, he remembers that he is the Archdeva and finally regains a part of his Archdeva powers. This was in no way comparable to what the Archdeva was before the Cataclysm, because it is said that the Archdeva was able to rival or even exceed the power of all 12 Imperial Lords combined. However, this was a huge power increase for the player. After leaving the Library of Knowledge, the player returns to Veda to make his report on what had happened, and that he remembers that he was the Archdeva. Veda was hopeful that he would also remember her, but he didn't. And here I want to mention that there is a great comic that is called La Veroka. It covers the story of Veda, the Archdeva, and Akarios before the Cataclysm happened. A short summarization is: Veda and her family fled from their old village as the Valar took over more and more regions. They moved to a village where her uncle Akarios was living. This village was however also overrun by Valar. During the raid, her parents were killed and the Archdeva saved her and the few remaining villagers. From that point onwards, she became more or less a student of the Archdeva, and Akarios himself joined the Archdeva's Legion. Akarios should be a familiar name to many of you, as there are many places named after him to honor his actions in Poeta, like the Akarios Plains or the Akarios Village. Akarios was also at the attack of the peace talks, and much later he was also one of the 2 survivors of the Deltras Incident. And this man Akarios is Pernos, who helped the player at the beginning of his journey in Poeta. Now let's get back to Illuma. There was not much time to ponder on that for too long, because the etheric field around Illuma weakens, which would make it a perfect target for the Valar. And the creature that can help the Devas with that is a Libo that they call the Sage of the Tower of Eternity. The Sage even remembers the Archdeva, but he also recognizes that the current Archdeva is very weak and very different from before. But that is the price the Archdeva had to pay for the tragedy he caused. The fragments of the Tower of Eternity cause the creatures in this region to mutate. They become almost crystallized. The plan of the Sage is to collect those tower fragments and construct a protection artifact with it. As the Ilios collect the tower fragments and plan to construct the protection artifact, it comes to multiple fights against the Asmodeans. In the meantime, a lot of people in Sanctum and Pandemonium had nightmares about the sky above their capitals darkening, and an evil presence looming above them. It was as the Imperial Lords fought. Not only the etheric field around Illuma and Northwold had weakened, the etheric field had weakened everywhere, and therefore Ereshkigal's invasion of Sanctum and Pandemonium began. Multiple dragons attacked the capitals, and a lot of Devas were instantly called back from the Abyss and other regions to defend their capitals against the Balaur attack. In the chaos of this attack, many Devas vanished. They were abducted by the Balaur. Their invasion of the capitals was not to destroy them, but to capture Devas. The Balaur brought these Devas to the Bastion of Souls, or Narakali. And all of this is due to a flower called Sakrapes, or Incarna. Not much is known about the creation of this flower, but it is said that the flower represents how the selfish wish for immortality has the price of several innocent lives. The flower blooms only once every 1000 years, and once it blooms, it is able to grant a past soul a second chance. This flower was long ago found and kept by Ereshkigal. She gathered her strongest witches, named the Ancient Harvesters, that would tend to the flower. As Ereshkigal escaped her prison, her power had greatly weakened from the long slumber. It would have been a perfect use for the Sakrapes flower. However, the Sakrapes bloomed 700 years ago, so 300 years are still missing. To speed up the flower's blooming, the harvesters created the Bastion of Souls. There they sacrificed all kinds of creatures, even their own Balaur. But the best result was sacrificing Devas, and that is why the invasion of the capitals happened. The flower was almost ready as the Devas finally learned of the harvesters' plan. The Devas invaded the Bastion of Souls to disrupt their rituals. Despite the best efforts, one of the ancient harvesters escaped with the Sakrapes flower. The Sakrapes was used, and Ereshkigal's power was fully restored. There is an interesting mind game to this situation with Ereshkigal. Ereshkigal had the Sakrapes flower in her possession and ordered her harvesters to tend to it before her fight against Phrygian, so she might have used this as her fallback plan in case Phrygian defeated and killed her. Phrygian, however, might have known that the Sakrapes flower was in Ereshkigal's possession, and that is why he didn't kill her, but instead he sealed her away. The Devas could finally pinpoint Ereshkigal's location. It was the Divine Fortress in the Abyss. Both factions advanced with airships to the core of Roshanta, but Ereshkigal appeared in her dragon form and obliterated dozens of their airships. The remaining troops had to retreat. A second attack was planned and the Devas managed to get into the core. However, Nurgle, one of Ereshkigal's most loyal generals, activated an ether trap that sent the ether-powered airships of the Devas crushing into the ground. The Devas confronted Nurgle and finally killed him. With this, their way to the Divine Fortress was open. There they confront another one of Ereshkigal's generals, Orison, to take control of the Divine Fortress. Inside of the Divine Fortress, the Devas find a portal that leads them to a place called Mirage Sanctum. Here, some of Ereshkigal's harvesters resurrected her fallen troops, which explains why there were so many of them. The Devas finally killed the overseer of this place, Kirshka. With all of this, the Devas had taken back control over the Abyss. They had significantly weakened Ereshkigal's army by defeating her three most loyal generals and stopping her harvesters to endlessly resurrect her Balaur troops. Ereshkigal, however, was not done. She used a substantial amount of her power to destabilize and fracture the Abyss, sending its debris crashing into both Elysia and Asmodee. This event came to be known as the Scarring of Atreya. When Ereshkigal attempts to obliterate the world of the Devas, the Archdeva appears, and just like he did during the Cataclysm, he sacrifices himself to prevent the complete destruction of Elysia and Asmodee. Thanks to the Archdeva's sacrifice, about half of the regions could be saved. With this selfless sacrifice, the Archdeva has atoned for his past mistakes, and this time he vanished forever, without his essence and his memories being sealed away. The 6.0 patch marks a crucial change for the entire story of Aion. This marks a new beginning in many ways, both lore-wise and gameplay-wise. No longer is it a story about the Archdeva and about Azphel, which both were the main characters of the story up to now. With the Archdeva or player character basically being dead and gone, it is unclear who the new player character from 6.0 and onwards is. And gameplay-wise, a lot of the regions were also gone, meaning all the main story quests had to be reworked completely. And there is much more to it, which I however won't go into in this video. Ereshkigal had sworn vengeance to Phrygian, Beritra and the Devas. Ereshkigal saw that her plan failed due to the Archdeva's sacrifice, and had no choice but to flee to a new region, Lacrum. Lacrum was initially the land of the Jotun, and Ereshkigal took over Primev's Forge, which was a forge of the Jotun, where they crafted a strange relic, a glove with unknown powers. The Jotun were then mind-controlled to continue their work under Ereshkigal and to finish their work on the mysterious glove. This was however not Ereshkigal's big plan. Her real plan was to seize control of the so-called Genesis relic. This relic was forged by the Jotun and held enormous power of controlling ether and even to create life. The Jotun feared that it would land in the wrong hands, and therefore they sealed it away and even used a protective spell on it. Ereshkigal wanted to transform this relic. Although it is used to create life, she wanted to twist it and use it for destruction. Ereshkigal, however, couldn't overcome the relic's protection, meaning it would take a long time to absorb its power. But she had another plan. She took control of the Jotun temple, knowing that the Jotun would ask Devas for help. She then used and sacrificed the Devas that were sent there to feed the souls of the Devas into the relic, using their life force to weaken the protective spell of the relic. The Devas had managed to defeat Ereshkigal's general in the Primev's Forge, and now cornered her in the temple called Valenfrone. The Devas pushed her to her limits, and in a desperate attempt to gain the upper hand, she tried to absorb the Genesis relic despite the protective spell on it. Due to this, the relic rejected her, it even weakened her. The Devas used this chance to defeat her and kill her. This was the end of the Dragon Lord Ereshkigal. As Ereshkigal dies, Beritra appears with the glove from Primev's Forge and uses it to absorb the Genesis relic. However, he doesn't attack the Devas and simply vanishes. After Ereshkigal's defeat, a new region in the south of Balaurea was found, Dumaha. Dumaha was initially the land of the Dragon Lord Apsu. That leaves the question, who even is Apsu? When the Balaur started to ascend, it was Phrygian who became the first Dragon Lord, then Mislamteda, and then Ereshkigal. Beritra and Apsu ascended at the same time. With this, Phrygian decided that his formation was perfect, and that there would be no more additions to the ranks of the Dragon Lords. Soon after Beritra and Apsu, Tiamat ascended. However, due to Phrygian's decision, she was not included as a Dragon Lord. Apsu was the least violent of the Dragon Lords, more focused on accumulating wealth and caring for his land. Although Balaur are known for their arrogance and hot-headed behavior, many Balaur tribes willingly followed and supported the calm Dragon Lord Apsu. Tiamat, who couldn't be included in the ranks of the Dragon Lords, became a general of Apsu. She proved her skill in battle and was promoted to being Apsu's personal guard. This allowed Tiamat to finally fulfill her true plan. Apsu was a very proud creature, unwilling to take advice or compromises. This gathered distrust and frustration among his generals. Tiamat used this to build a loyal and secret following, and when she gathered enough allies, she turned against Apsu. It came to a fight between Tiamat and Apsu, and when the dust settled, Tiamat stood upon Apsu's corpse and declared herself as the new 5th Dragon Lord. It was, however, not that simple. Most Balaur and the Dragon Lords did not approve of Tiamat's action. However, Phrygian made it official. Tiamat was the new official 5th Dragon Lord. It is said that both Ereshkigal and Meslamteda were against this. When Beritra heard that Tiamat had assassinated Apsu, he was furious and swore to take revenge. This was because Beritra and the now dead Apsu were lovers. When he later learned that Phrygian even appointed Tiamat as the new 5th Dragon Lord, he took his rage and went to the battlefield. These attacks by Beritra are known as the most brutal and gruesome during the entire Millenium War. But now let's get back to Dumaha. Dumaha is far more advanced in comparison to the old regions in Aion. Technology like trains, more modern airships, and in general a more steampunk vibe. And all of this fast development was thanks to the Stellar Corporation. The Stellar Corporation started as a simple mining company that harvested raw materials. But then they started developing a new product called Naki 6. This Naki 6 product greatly enhanced the fighting power of whomever takes it, and the Stellar Corporation sold it to both factions, Ilios and Asmodeans. Naki 6, however, is not a simple energy boost. It makes the people addicted to Naki 6. And that is because Stellar uses Dragon Lord legacies as a raw material to make Naki 6. Dragon Lord legacies are items that are still infused with Apsu's power. So more or less, the people that take in Naki 6 do take in the lingering power of Apsu, a Dragon Lord, which, yes, does increase their fighting power for a while, but it also corrupts them. Even high-ranking Ilios and Asmodean generals are bribed by Stellar and tell the player to not do investigations into Stellar or Naki 6. As the player continues his journey in Dumaha, he chases a small Balaur tribe called Rhaegar. As he arrives in their camp, the Balaur are fighting a girl. This girl is Inanna. The leaders of this Balaur tribe has Tiamat's crown in his possession and manage to escape. Tiamat's crown basically holds the leftover powers of Tiamat. Inanna and the player later confront him and have him cornered. With no other choice, the Balaur tries to absorb Tiamat's power, and he simply gets evaporated by its sheer power. Inanna gets caught in this power flow, and a portal into Inanna's past opens. Due to this, the player learns more about Inanna. Inanna was half human and half Balaur. She was completely ostracized by other Balaur, and even enslaved by the Rhaegar tribe. A small Balaur tribe formed from Tiamat's remaining armies. During this enslavement, she befriended a Shugo named Beninurk. Beninurk then later built the Stellar Corporation, and Inanna helped him, as they shared the goal of making the world a better place, so nobody has to suffer through enslavement just as they did. This, however, didn't stay this way, as Beninurk's greed for power and money took over. He even experimented with Naki 6. Initially, it wasn't really planned to influence Devas with it. It primarily was used to experiment with awakening a new Dragon Lord with it. One of these failed experiments was Mortasha, which the Devas had to take care of. Inanna, however, refused to believe that her best friend Beninurk would do something like that, and she ran away from the Devas. The Devas then discovered an area underneath the Silentera Canyon, called Tempus Fugit. There the player discovered a relic of the Jotun, Tempus Ipsum, and the man that waited for him, Irunin. Let's talk about this man first. Irunin was the first Vandal or Painter, which is a new class that has been released during this patch. Back then, before the Cataclysm, Irunen infused paint with ether, and with Lady Seer's support, he recruited and trained the first Vandals or Painters. However, after Lady Seer's death during the Cataclysm, this new class was lost to history, only surviving in the shadows due to a few members. When Ereshkigal laid waste to the lands by crushing the Abyss into Elysia and Asmodee, the Vandals returned and selflessly sacrificed themselves to save innocent lives. Due to their skill and valor during this time, they have been recognized by the Empyrean Lords, and Devas have once again been trained to become Vandals and Painters. Now let's go back to the Jotun relic Tempus Ipsum. This relic was fashioned after Lady Seer's powers. With it you would be able to see into the future, and it also allows you to travel to a certain point in time. Tempus Ipsum shows the player a vision in which Inanna is crowned as the new Dragon Lord by Apsu. This event would bring great calamity over the world. Irunen then hands the relic to the player and warns him. This relic can only be used once. The Devas then found out that Inanna was brought to another region, Afsaranta. Afsaranta was another region ruled over by the previous Dragon Lord Apsu, and was later destroyed by Tiamat when she took over. And here the Devas encounter a new powerful resource called Aion. Aion is what Drana and Ether originated from, and over time the Devas learn how to use this Aion to create powerful weapons, armor and also potions. Inanna had been brought to the heart of Afsaranta, an ancient temple of the Dragon Lord Apsu. The player follows her there in an attempt to stop Inanna's ascension to become a Dragon Lord. The temple had a strange ability of returning every object inside of it to a previous state in the past. This unique effect allowed Irunen and the player to use the Jotun relic Tempus Ipsum multiple times. The player first tried to talk with Inanna to stop her from becoming a Dragon Lord, which failed. They traveled back in time with the relic and decided to eliminate Apsu's spirit, which also didn't stop Inanna from ascending. They traveled back in time once more and tried to destroy the crown itself, yet once again it was no use. Whatever they tried, no matter how often they tried, Inanna becoming a Dragon Lord couldn't be avoided. Irunen and the player escape from the heart of Afsaranta to make a report. From a failed attempt to stop Inanna, the Devas got a recording of a conversation between Inanna and Beninurk. Inanna had escaped the temple with Apsu's crown, and they will leave for a region in the south of Afsaranta, where she can focus on fully awakening as a Dragon Lord. The only thing the Devas can do now is to prepare for the worst, as the new Dragon Lord Inanna will ascend soon. And this is where the game is currently at. Inanna is ascending as a Dragon Lord, and the Devas are preparing for war. Still no sight of Phrygian or Meslemtada, but Berithra is still alive, and still has the powerful Genesis relic in his possession. Now, as I said in the beginning, this video isn't supposed to give you all the answers. 2 hours are by far not enough to get into all the details of the very vast Aion lore. This video's purpose is to refresh the memories of old players, to show the key events that happened in this world to new people that want to dive into Aion 2, and ultimately to hopefully entice people to learn more about the vast lore of Aion. I will put a lot of links and references into the description about some of the topics I covered today in this video. If you're interested in more Aion lore, My channel has a big focus on that, and if you can't find a video about a specific topic on my channel, leave a comment here on the video or in my Discord server. For those of you that are watching this because of Aion 2, there are many topics that are already covered that we know are also present in Aion 2, like for example the Sumian Temple, or Inanna, who seems to be the new Dragon Lord Ishtar, or the Imperial Lord Kaizenel, who was also shown in a trailer. Anyway, I thank you all for watching. I've put a lot of work into this, so I hope you enjoyed it. Have a nice day, and I will see you in Aion 2. Bye.